Hello. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1099th New Social Environment. I'm Magley, the program's associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Hermine Ford and Tom McGlynn. And now I'll introduce today's guests and hosts. Hermine Ford lives and works in New York and Nova Scotia. Ford's paintings are an accumulation of observations, and her perspective is honed by watching and experiencing how cities and their neighborhoods change, build, and destroy themselves. Ford has exhibited her work widely and was the 2023 recipient of the Murray Reich Distinguished Artist Award presented by the New York Foundation for the Arts. And our host today, artist, writer, independent curator, and editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail, Tom McGlynn, is based in the New York City area. McGlynn's work is interested in the morphing of commercial signage into ciphers of phenomenal experience, minimalist abstract arrangements of color. He's also an adjunct professor at Parsons School of Design, the New School. And now I'll hand it over to Tom.
Thank you, Magley, and it's a pleasure to be here today with Hermine and everyone else. I saw her current fantastic show at Natalie Card, which has a really interesting new space on Elizabeth Street, and I think it might be best, Hermine, to just go through an initial introduction as to your influences, your historical influences and personal influences in your work. Maybe we can bring up the slideshow, and then we can work off of that. So this is a work by your father, Jack Tworkov, and
Correct.
I have some ideas about his gesture referencing, your kind of incremental gesture, but I'd like you to kind of talk about how he might have influenced your trajectory.
Yeah, I think the first thing you said is absolutely correct. And I do honor and acknowledge that for sure. I grew up in a family of artists, and I admired my father a lot. But I tried very, very hard not to be an artist myself. There were a lot of them around me, and I was a kid that I was one of those kids, like lots of kids, that I like to make art. I like to make things. I was always making stuff. And everybody thought, oh, you're going to be an artist when you grow up. And I really tried very hard not to be. But in the end, I couldn't avoid it. I sort of gave in at some point. And in the meantime, I had also married a painter. So it was challenging to make a space for myself, but at the same time, I knew that I had to also embrace my history with my family. I wasn't the kind of person, or as it turned out, the kind of artist who needed to reject it in order to make my own way. I don't know if that answers.
Yes, I mean, there's examples, say, like, if you think of Kiki Smith in relation to her father's work, there's much more of a gap in terms of like a kind of reactive
Sure.
response. And you mentioned your husband, who recently passed. My condolences.
Thank you.
Do we have an image of his, of Robert Moskowitz?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, we don't. Okay.
I think we do. I think Jason and I. No, you sure?
This one?
There it is.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So is that a zoomed in image, or can we zoom out on that? Is that possible?
This one is zoomed out. This was
Okay.
the original image.
Well, it's quite an interesting image from his amazing show at Peter Freeman just about 6 months ago.
Mhm.
And it's interesting in relation to the Chorkov painting because it's similarly kind of minimal and has the one that you chose here has a certain kind of maybe pseudomorphic relation to your father's work. Um,
I'm laughing. I mean, I think I have a good reason to actually, because you're absolutely correct. I mean, it is quite an amazing phenomena, actually. I met Bob while they were both still at the Castelli Gallery. And Bob was an admirer of his. It became, anyway, I'll leave it at that, but for sure.
yeah, of course, your husband came to the fore in like a new image type of, work that was being shown in the 70s during kind of a period of where the image was coming back into abstraction, but he's kind of between abstraction and figuration. He's an interesting, fascinating example of somebody who, navigates that fine line between abstraction and figuration.
I just mentioned, as long as we're talking about him, however briefly, he never really had a real education, but he did go to night school at Pratt, where he studied with Adolf Gottlieb.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they loved each other. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah.
I didn't actually know that Gottlieb taught at Pratt.
I think he taught it briefly in the night school.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another abstract expressionist.
Exactly. That's why I mention it.
Right. You also mentioned in our previous meeting that you had worked on Jennifer Bartlett's painting or installation.
Rhapsody.
So you worked on this.
I did. A bunch of us did.
Who were the bunch? Are there anybody we might?
Oh yeah, lots of people. Let's see if I can. Well, Elizabeth Murray worked on that with us, and I think Ellen Phelan, and it was a huge project. Anybody she could rope into it. And it was fun. We had a lot of fun doing it. It was fun to be with Jennifer in those days. And it was all on the floor. We were all on the floor kneeling over these plates. And yeah, we had met each other the summer before. She rented a studio apartment that was attached to my parents' house in Provincetown, and that's how we met each other. I hadn't decided to be an artist at that time. I had a small child. And actually, it really was Jennifer who gave me a very stern lecture and said, "You are an artist, and the sooner you accept that and figure that out, the better the better."
Well, that's wonderful. But also again, there is a formal genealogy in terms of like the incremental tessellation in this work,
Absolutely, yes.
and just the conceptualization of image as cumulative
Yes.
and serial. Yeah, she was a real standout in that period, I think.
I think so. I agree. I think so.
I think she was showing at Paula Cooper, right?
Yes, she was.
Yeah, I mean, she's also an interesting artist who straddles the image and abstraction and formal concerns, which we'll get to in your work shortly. And you mentioned Elizabeth Murray too. I think we have one image of Elizabeth Murray's.
Well, as I mentioned, I met Jennifer in Provincetown one summer when she was renting a studio from my parents, and we became very, very good friends. She was a lot of fun to be around. My mother always said, "Oh, that Jennifer, she's full of beans." And she said to me during that summer, she said, "I can't wait till we're all back in New York together and you can meet my friend Elizabeth Murray."
Ah,
That's how
great.
that.
Well, I mean, obviously, as we'll see, the shaped canvas in your current show is super important. Um, and so maybe we could just let's just segue to your current show at Natalie Clark, if we can.
Okay.
I think it's a perfect segue from Elizabeth's work.
Mhm.
So there's this wonderful wall, or walls, I should say, in the Clark space, which is it's a fascinating space. It has its really high ceilings,
Mhm.
and it's really it's able to encompass these works as sculpture slash painting.
Mm.
I feel, because of the space itself, the physicality of the space and the work really complement each other. Um, these series, well, the show is called Follow Me. Um, and can you give us some insight into that title? I mean, sometimes I know titles are just lyrical references, but
Well, um, I'll give a shorter version of a possible answer. I was thinking, I don't often title my paintings, but I made a painting in Cape Breton that I had a title for. I mean, sometimes they just come to me and they're perfect and they're ready-made. And follow me is the first two words of a sentence, and the sentence is, "Follow me into the woods and I'll show you where the chanterelles are." So I'm laughing at myself, but in a way, I love to tell that story because, at least speaking for myself, and I think for other painters, some other painters anyway, it's quite that simple. I mean, simple is a complicated word, actually, but it is. It can be just like that, you know. Follow me into the woods and I'll show you the chanterelles. Well, well, first of all, I very rarely titled my paintings, and I certainly wasn't about to give a painting that long and specific a title. So I just shortened it to Follow Me. But it does have to do, in my mind, and I'd have no expectation that that I'm illustrating this for a viewer. But it does, in my mind, represent the time that I've spent in Canada in the summer, where it's quite empty landscape.
I can, as you know, I can totally relate to that whole scenario, because um, I also go to Cape Breton in the summer, and we also hunt for chanterelles in August. And the experience is, you're in this very dense, primarily spruce forest, and then the chanterelles are like bright yellow.
That's right. So
So
beautiful.
it's this process of discovery and color. They really stand out, when you do discover them. But I mean, it could also be an analogy of just the process of discovery in your work. Um,
I like that.
like
Yeah.
you're a trusted guide or something. But
Well,
you have this quote also in from the show, where you say, all we are, all we see is nature. And so, you know, if someone was looking at these just, without a kind of backstory, I, I don't know if they would immediately think about nature. Maybe with the exception of that piece that we're looking at this in the installation in the upper left.
Oh, why does that one seem more about nature than the others?
Well, I'm just making it's just a proposition. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I'm not saying it for sure, but I think the way it unfolds
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of organic way,
Yes.
it encompasses the geometry of the other works, but then there's this kind of unfolding where the geometry comes apart and then comes back together again. Um, and I know that in part the mosaics are related to an experience you had way back when in Rome.
Yes.
Maybe you can relate that experience.
Yeah, so I had been making
1:17 p.m.
As we said before, I mean, I started making drawings in the dunes of just the grass. So it was just a stroke. It wasn't a picture of the dunes. It was just a repeated stroke.
Can we see those? Can we see those
Um,
the dune
I'm-
drawings?
I think we have a picture of that somewhere. I'm sure we do. There at the top.
Okay, great.
Actually, that is a more of a picture of a dune, but from that, I'm making a gesture with my hands. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, but if you look in the interior and just imagine a field of those strokes, that's what I eventually decided to do because I really wasn't interested in making landscapes or still lifes.
Right. So
Almost
again,
because I love those paintings so much, the great ones, so I had no, I don't want to create a split between those things. To me, it's a continuum, but anyway, you understand.
but this also introduces the idea that we had talked about in our previous meeting about how nature is a prompt for you, not necessarily a model.
That's right. That's right.
And again, you can see the incremental mark making, not to put too fine point on it, but like going back to your father.
Absolutely. And and it's funny because I didn't, at the point that I began to realize that, I really had to stop myself and make peace with it. And that was kind of, when I look back on it, it's quite an amazing, I mean, I feel good that I was able to do that because I was not a rebellious daughter at all. And so I had to make peace with that. I had to accept that influence. And so I just took it and I went forward with it in some way. And it was, it was an experiment. I wanted to see what would happen. And so that's how it developed.
Yeah, it could be a real trap to kind of try to make these epigenetic connections that didn't just happen organically. It again, like a pseudomorphic relation between historical periods, where it becomes a meta narrative that might not necessarily
Yeah,
actually reflect the artist's own experience.
right.
But the way you describe it is very eloquent, in your discovery um, of how those marks, reference back to your father's work, but they were just prompted. They were prompted by your experience in the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I treasure that. I don't, as I've already said, I was excited when I realized that because that made it feel very genuine to me. I mean, I knew there was something very much that was mine, my experience of other people's work, my experience of being in a natural setting that I loved very, very much. And so I just went on faith, pure blind. I mean, it was blind faith that I could make something of this that eventually would be mine.
And getting back to, so like the mosaic format,
Oh,
I know that you related this story about kind of epiphany you had in Rome,
well,
or no, in Pompeii, actually.
yeah, it was in Pompeii. Well, maybe epiphany is a bit strong of a word, but since I was already working with repeating a single stroke, I went to Rome. My husband was invited to the American Academy in Rome. And so we went together the first time, and for 3 months at the Academy. And while we were there, we took a trip to Pompeii, which people often do. And we were walking around, and, it's fabulous. And we were in the street, in a street, there was a sundial in the ground, that had fallen away from a house that had fallen over, been pushed over by the volcano. And there was a sundial on the ground, but it was broken. There were pieces of it missing. And it was mosaic because it had come from this. So I said to my husband, he was with me, I said, "Oh, I think I can use this." And I took pictures of it. And that's how it started. It
But that was quite a long time ago.
was a very, very long time ago.
So was it something that kind of percolated or gestated in the back of your memory for a while, or like when did you? Sorry.
Good question. Let's see if I can remember that. I doubt if it happened right away. That wouldn't quite be in my nature, where I would go home and throw over everything I had been doing and suddenly go down a brand new path. I think I kind of incorporated it into what I was already doing. And it felt so natural to me, I was really thrilled. I was excited, and I loved making them, I have to say. And then they always surprised me. They surprised me because they told me things about themselves that I couldn't have anticipated, you know. It's almost
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's almost like when I first saw the sundial itself.
Right.
Wow, why is this having such a huge effect on me? This means something to me. I have no idea what it is. And that's how I experience my own paintings.
When I teach painting, I encourage my students to acknowledge when the painting starts making itself. When you start painting the painting rather than trying to make a painting.
Yeah.
When the painting is actually dictating.
That's right. It leads you.
Right.
It's the leader. It becomes the leader.
Exactly. And that's like kind of like the sweet spot, the onerous boss, whatever. But it's actually the best place to be when you're a painter, because you're just responding to what's in front of you.
And Tom, that's where that title "Follow Me" comes from. It's the painting is telling me that.
Another level.
Yeah, follow me. And I'm okay.
I thought that. I thought that because of my experience. I know that the titles are not that important to you, or not as significant as they could be, like in terms of illustrating the work. But
right.
I was also curious about your title to the show that you had at Furnace Art on Paper, "The Normally Invisible."
Oh,
I love that title too.
Yeah, where did that come from? Again, I didn't make that up. I stole it from something that I was reading. But I can vaguely speak to that. I don't remember the specific reference anymore. But yes, the world is full of things that you are able to see only occasionally when different circumstances fall together.
Right.
And that normally you can't see them. You don't see them. Does that make
Right.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was also like, if you put the emphasis on the normally, you could also you could also conjecture it's like, well, there's all this stuff around that's really credible, and it's invisible to me because I'm kind of like just going through, the daily chores or whatever. So I like that reading of it too. It's normally invisible. Um, yeah. So that's how I kind of construed that.
Yeah. I think everybody has those experiences, whether they notice them or not, or can describe it in that way or not. I think people understand what that is.
Maybe you'd like to talk about, since there is a kind of seriality to this work in terms of the format. Um, I mean, maybe you can say that about anybody's work, but maybe you can talk about some of the variations, say like where there are 4 arcs, like in this installation view, there's 4 arcs as opposed to 2, and how that kind of develops in the studio.
Well, I make a lot of drawings, and all kinds of drawings. I make very quick notational drawings. I make diagrammatic drawings. Sometimes I cut things out and move them around, and then I make more formal drawings. So it's hard for me to say exactly what I'm tracking, but at some point, I don't know if I'm still on point here, Tom, to your
Sure.
question.
Yeah.
What, can you ask me the question again one more time?
Oh, I'm just talking about like the variation in the format. So
Yeah.
I know that sometimes those just come about again, just intuitively and organically. But now that the show is up, as an observer, as a viewer, in this installation shot, for instance, I'm looking at the 2 on the right, and one is just 2 arcs that are kind of interacting, and one is 4 arcs, which is more complex.
Right.
It's also more complex color wise.
That's right.
Maybe we can also talk about your color.
Well, once I started to make, let's say I made the painting on the right, then it's like, oh, well, if I can do that, I could also do this.
Right.
And then if I could do this, what about this? And that's what the paintings are. They're just exactly like that. As far as the color is concerned, well, in some paintings, I would say the color is more local than in others, if you know what I mean. I think that the black and yellow painting is a kind of a planetary thing, the sun or whatever. I
Like
think there's a lot of,
like yin yang kind of.
well, I wouldn't think of it that way. I think of it as like planets or, but of course you could think of it that way. I don't object to that at all.
Well, it's a binary, so it's
It is, and it's, gee, it's hard for me to trace my steps. I think that, if I find it visually interesting, for whatever reason, that's enough for me.
Right.
And then I could go back and, and it's the same thing with the color. I'm looking up close at this. Well, is there a logic to why the color suddenly changes somewhere? No, but that's like, I grew up the daughter of an abstract expressionist. It's completely intuitive. Not that that was completely intuitive either. I mean, I think there's a misunderstanding always about that as well. But I mean, I'm really willing to just follow my instinct. And if it has something to tell me, oh, well, then I'm interested in that.
In looking at this painting, it just came to me. I'm also thinking of like the work of Robert Mangel,
Oh,
like in terms of tangents, in terms of geometric tangents that are kind of asymmetrically balanced.
I love Bob Mangel's work, actually.
Because the asymmetry also can relate to nature.
Yes. Yeah.
The dynamism of that, spirals being kind of generated by the golden mean and
Yes.
that
Yeah.
kind of natural dynamism. But in your work, it's interesting because when we think of mosaic, we think of like the craft. It's an elaborated craft. It's an extrapolation of nature, and I think of Jack Whitten's work in that regard too, and how he deployed tessellation in his work, and also his philosophy of like science, painting as a science, and painting how science is related to kind of nature and physics.
I think I love that, and Jackie Whitten's work too, but I think he was much more intellectual about all that than I am.
I agree. I agree. It's just interesting when you think about the commonality of nature.
Yes.
And also, like he had that experience of the old New World thing too, except his was Greece and not Rome.
Right. That's right.
And there was this kind of an interesting kind of a meeting between it's like that old world craft and modernist inclination.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. I totally accept that. I just think that I found the way I was looking at the mosaics, I found to be completely abstract. Whatever they were illustrating, or whatever the architectural site was that they were so-called decorating, it's not that I wasn't interested in any of that. I certainly was. But visually, that's not, I just found as a visual experience, I found them to be completely abstract. And so that's a part that really interested me. That
Right. There's aspects of the form that actually creates its own matrix.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's a dispersed grid in a way.
That's right. Yeah.
So it kind of, in an interesting way, your work, in deploying that kind of the reference to the mosaic obviates the whole issue of like form in a way, because it's inherent to the mosaic form, the grid form, and how how color how in the tessellation there's kind of there's a reflectivity. There's kind of a transparency and a reflectivity in how the colors work, which also obviates like a formalist reading of like like a hard edge color painting.
Oh yeah.
I find that one of the most interesting aspects of the show, of this show, is that the format itself, while it might reference that historical, you know, craft, it does these other things that it makes paintings that in which like the formal concerns, they're 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 explicit, but there's also a lot of subtlety in the range of colors that you get in the mosaic format.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear you say that because, and I'm just laughing at myself at how uneven the round edge is on this. Which I like, by the way. I mean, yeah. I hear you, Tom. I mean, I don't think of myself as a formalist. You know, I just don't. I mean, I don't, of course, I accept that I've set up, you know, certain rules, quote unquote. I mean, of course, I can change those rules anytime I start a new painting. But I set up a situation that's challenging. I don't know exactly how I'm going to resolve it. I often make quite radical changes in the color as I finish a painting up. And I think, honestly, I mean, I think that the thing I'm the most involved in is kind of entertaining myself with this.
Well, that's a really honest answer. Because I mean, that's what we do in the studio. We try to get to that place where, you know, it propels itself
Yes.
in a way. But you know, it's interesting. So like when I'm just kind of thinking like in your shoes, like when I'm painting like a series of squares, when does it shift? Like, what does your palette look like? Is it many colors and then you just like,
No, I don't have no, I don't paint, I don't work that way. That's a very traditional way of working where you have a big palette and all the colors are out there. It's pretty specific. And I often mix the paint up in a tuna fish can. So I have quite a lot of it, for instance. And so I'm working that way.
right?
And
But sometimes, like in this one, there's like optical mixing going on, like as a point in a
that's right. And
pointillist
I
painting.
do that. I do that as I go along. And I do that on a palette, on a paper palette, really. It's with what I have in the can. If I want to alter it, I do that two different ways. Sometimes I alter it as I'm going along, and sometimes I alter it later.
Right. I guess it's the altering as you go along that I'm interested in, because that implies a much more of an intuitive.
It is. That's what I keep saying. It's completely intuitive.
Right. And I was just wondering about like the technical thing. So like if you're going along with like orange and then you shift to yellow, do you have like orange and yellow like on your palette? Do you know what I mean? Like, or
Yeah,
okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have a work table and I have every tube of color that's available, you know, is there. And when I need it, no, I don't have it all out on the palette already because I don't really have a palette.
Right.
I mean, I have a place where I mix and I, you know, try things out, but I don't really have a palette. And then I can just alter it as I go along. I get it. You know, I take another tuna fish can, I put some of the orange in there, and then I add yellow to that. So then I've got two versions of that orange.
Right. So do you wind up with like 10 tuna fish cans at the end? I guess that's what I was trying to figure out, because
Everybody I know is saving dog food cans and tuna fish cans.
Well, actually, this leads me to an interesting question, which is also like shop talk.
Sure,
Uh,
that's the best.
right, I think so. When do you save colors?
I
Do,
try
do,
to.
you have a library of colors?
What do you mean?
Well, like
Actually, like try to save the pigment that's left over from
yeah,
paint.
leftovers. Yeah,
Yeah, I do try to. It's, as you know, it's not so simple, but there are things you can do. You know, sometimes I cover, if it's on a palette, I'll put you know, a tuna fish can or some kind of a container over it so that it stays wet longer. There's a limit to that. Or I might take it off the palette and put it in a can and cover it up.
right.
But of course that doesn't last forever. But on the other hand, I've gone back to Canada in the spring and found tuna fish cans of pigment that I saved that way. They probably frozen or whatever. The oil doesn't freeze, but whatever happens to it over the summer. And if I break through the shell that it's created, I can still use it.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking that is because sometimes when you have like these leftovers, they become like this like random access memory library, that become your palette. Not, I mean, I'm using the palette in the kind of general, not
No, I
literal sense.
understand. I understand.
And I know that for me, like when I save my paint in like those plastic deli containers.
Yeah,
And I also work with acrylic, so it's it can't be exposed to air.
right.
But when I glance over to like my shelf with all my leftover paints, which I often reuse, um, I'm kind of surrounded by like my prior experience of it. It becomes my palette. It becomes it's inherent. It becomes like this inherent thing.
That's
So
great.
I'm not hunting and pecking, and I think that's the experience of a lot of artists. And I was just wondering if that was your experience.
Well, not exactly, but I do have, I can totally relate to that. I have a version, I mean, it's almost like a diary that you're keeping.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
Well, it could be like the wall behind you, right? Like I love that wall behind you because that's also like a kind of a glossary of form and color.
Yeah,
Is-
I mean, those, yeah, I'm glad. I don't know if anybody can really see those up close, but um, I do make a lot of those, and I'm glad you brought them up because uh, this is where I can. I mean, I really make a lot of them, and then so I have a very full, sort of vocabulary list to choose from when
Right.
I make a painting. And I'm already quite familiar up to a point. I mean, of course, going from a drawing on a watercolor or gouache on paper to a oil paint on canvas is a huge change. But I think I'm trying to make the transition as easy as smooth as possible for myself. So I'm really on familiar territory by the time I get to the painting.
I really appreciated what you said about making different types of drawings, and
Oh, yeah.
and so you use gouache, but do you also use like pencil or charcoal? And do you use
Uh,
other mediums besides gouache?
Lately, I have made in the past, I've made a lot of charcoal drawings. I've made a lot of pencil drawings. Those early dune drawings were all in pencil. I made a lot of pencil drawings. I mean, and but I haven't done that in a long time. I've been mostly, I draw that out in pencil. Sometimes I'm using rulers and things to help me circuit. And then I just Oh, very important. I splash the paper before I do anything. I splash the paper like this with color, thin washes of color, just to break the space up. And you can see that, I think, in the drawings. Can you see that up close?
I saw it in your show at the Furnace
Yeah.
Art on Paper.
Yeah.
It was
And
more expressionist
yeah,
flashes.
yeah, that's right. I guess that's a good way. That's an easy way to describe them. I mean, what I'm doing is I'm not trying to make an abstract expressionist
Of course
graph.
not.
Of course not. But I am trying to just destroy the whiteness of the page. Like, I don't want to make that image on a clean white page.
Right.
I want it to be activated already before I make the image.
Right. No, it's interesting to hear you talk about your drawings too, because the relationship of a painter's paintings to their drawings is always interesting. It's not always a one-to-one relationship.
Oh.
Um, and you mentioned, going back to Cape Breton, place that we both love. You mentioned also collecting pebbles on the beach.
Oh, yeah.
And do we have any of those drawings? Like,
Um,
I mean, in the slideshow.
oh, I think we do. Maybe not. I'm sorry about
Sorry,
that.
which one are you referring to, Tom?
What are they called, Hermine?
They're oval
They're
or
oval.
round. Let's see, I don't think so. That's too bad. That's an omission on my part. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I just thought when we talked earlier that
Well, I can speak to it anyway, because
yeah, sure.
everybody knows what a beach pebble looks like.
Right.
And most of us, when we have the opportunity to spend time on the beach, which I have a lot of opportunity to do that, my house is full of not only my collection of pebbles, but other people's, they're like little piles of pebbles all over the place. And one day in my studio, sometimes when I'm painting, I like to start the day with a drawing practice. I like to, before if I'm working on a painting, I like to draw for a little bit before I start. And sometimes I have, a big drawing project going on, but most of the time I don't. So I started drawing these beach stones, and I wasn't interested in making a realistic picture of a beach stone, but right off the bat, I was interested in the shape. And I realized very quickly that I could use that shape, not as a picture of a beach pebble, but just as an abstract shape in and of itself, and that it was a found shape, that I didn't have to design one, that there was something organic and natural about it. It was just given to me, and so that was really great. And that's how I first started to make those.
There's such a range of beach pebbles up there too. I mean, there's the residue of the Carboniferous forests, the fossils,
Oh yeah, a lot of fossils.
marble, quartz. Like it's just such a
Amazing.
such a range of stones.
Yeah.
Would these be like rounded, rounded by the ocean stones?
Most of the time, the ones that yeah. I mean, I have quartz and all that stuff from other places around the island, but the ones that I have, piled up in my studio and in my house are from my beach down there, and they're they're smooth. They often have stripes and so on going through them, which is at one point was important to me, but it isn't any longer. It's just the shape itself.
Right. And you mentioned the shape of Marguerite Island.
And that's another thing, yeah.
Kind of referencing the the pebble shape also, because it's kind of
I always was aware of that.
right.
I was always aware of that from very early on when we first moved to that part of the island, that the pebbles echoed the shape of Marguerite Island, which is just off our coast.
Which is a wonderful natural analogy of like the micro and the macro.
Yes, I agree.
Right. Well, I think we're leading into the question and answer session. Hermine, is there anything I missed?
Oh,
Sure. Anything you'd want to talk about with the recent show? Any particular piece?
no, I can't really put my mind there, Tom. I'd be happy to answer questions. I hope there are a few.
Sure. I mean, we can just segue to questions. I mean, it's been a rich conversation. I really appreciate all your insights to your own work.
Thank you. Appreciate yours.
Thank you both for such a wonderful conversation. We have a question from Nima. See if I can find her.
Magli, I think it's Maria, actually. Maria Scarpini.
I see, okay. I'm gonna unmute you, Maria.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Hermine.
Hi.
Very beautiful work. I'm Italian, and I immediately related to this because not only I'm Italian, but I also have worked a lot as a conservator, and I also worked on mosaics. So it was something that completely resonated with me. But I'm also a painter, and what I really like is the fact that one color, as in nature, I guess, and also as in our experience, is made out of many colors. And so you identify a red, and then you look, and there are many reds, and maybe there's some green inside, etc. So it's very dynamic and very beautiful. My question was about those kind of angles that you apply with flat color. In my opinion, I mean, I perceive them as almost a list of, at least in the one that you use, that is almost a statement of rationalizing that you are using different colors, and then you blend it in this beautiful, intuitive way. Am I correct? Am I wrong?
I'm trying to find an example that I can look at.
Oh, the one that you have in the show that have
Yes.
those kind of triangles that have
Yes.
a flat color.
Yes.
So my question was, where did the need arose to insert that, because not all of them have it.
Oh.
And my perception was, okay, this is almost a come si dice, a leggenda, no? That you say, oh, gray, yellow, and green, and then you mix them and you do this.
Oh, that's such an interesting idea, but I don't think that's what it is.
Okay,
I don't think that it's about the color. I mean, it's always about color, but that I think that I told you that it really goes back to the sundial. It's
okay.
You get it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's more like the shape that somehow inspired this thing,
That's
more
right.
than, but then you decide to use a flat color, not so.
No, you know, this is very typical of me, I have to say. I mean, I've liked that you've brought this up because, as I said, or at least I hope I have said more than once, that I don't have any rules. I don't have a premeditated rules that I make up for myself, but then I have to follow. I know many artists who do that. And they very rarely deviate. I don't work that way. I give myself complete license to take things out, change, put things, you know, what's happening in the painting. And it's quite different from making a drawing. I mean, it turns into a whole other endeavor when I go to oil paint and increase the size like that. But I think that that's where it comes from originally. And I
Yes,
like breaking it up that way.
sorry.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say, I just like breaking it
No,
up.
yes, I understand. It's kind of, you feel to put that and you just put it because it's working. I personally sometimes work in the aftermath, and I somehow
In the
I
what?
look at after
Yes,
I
yes,
do
yes.
it, I look at it and maybe I try to understand what the heck I did, or somehow understand why I did use that thing in the. So my question was more like that. So you are saying, you know, I do it because I like to do it, period.
I think I identify with what you just described about yourself.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for that question. We have another question from Amanda, and I'll be asking it on their behalf. It's do you use masculine and feminine influences in your pieces? If so, how do you draw upon those?
I don't quite understand the question. Could you elaborate? Where is she?
The person can't unmute.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, could you repeat the question?
Yes. So do you use masculine and feminine influences in your pieces? If so, how do you draw upon those?
You know, I think I have to honestly answer, no, I don't. I don't even quite understand the question. I mean, am I painting consciously as a woman rather than as some other sex? No. Am I trying to express a particularly female relationship to what I've looked at in the world? No. Maybe that's the answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope it answers their question. We have another question from Bobby Goldman, and I
Hey,
will
Bobby.
unmute you.
I can't hear him.
Give me 1 second. I'm looking for him to unmute him. There you go. You're
You.
still muted. There you go. Okay.
Hi,
Can you
Bobby.
hear me? Hi, Hermine.
Hi.
Congratulations. Such a beautiful show. And I had the sensation there because of the circular shapes and partial circular shapes that the whole installation was revolving or spinning or rocking back and forth like the
Love that.
gears of a fine clock. And it was such a rare sensation. I've only experienced it one or two other times. That's not a
Wow.
question, it's an observation.
Well, thank you for that. It's amazing, Bobby.
Well, the show was amazing.
You're amazing.
All right. And then we have one last question from Chloe.
Hermine, I just want to first thank you so much for this conversation with Tom and to also congratulate you on the exhibition, which is beautiful. I have a question. I was really endeared when you said that you tried not to become an artist. And I'm curious about the moment when you knew you had to, and if you could elucidate that a little bit and tell us a bit about that, but also I have another question about the work itself, because I also noted its movement. And when I thought about the title Follow Me, I thought about how the work itself feels like a transformative process of going somewhere from a starting point. And I'm curious if you think about it that way or if you think about it another way.
Okay, let me answer the second question first. Well, I think we touched on this a tiny bit before, but follow me has to do with not in the, I mean, it became an invitation to follow me into the painting. And I like that. Follow me into this situation that I've created and see what kind of an experience you might have. But it does come from follow me, I'm going into the woods. I keep going back to that because, in some way it's a very banal string of words and a very banal thing but it has quite a resonance for me. And then what was the first question?
The first question was about how you tried not to become an artist. And I'm curious kind of what ultimately led you to the language of art after trying not to.
Well, the thing is, I was one of those kids that made art all the time. I never was not making stuff. And that made me suspicious about myself. I thought, well, that doesn't mean anything, And, I was, in high school, my math teacher, I would fail my math tests and she would say, oh, it doesn't matter, you're going to be an artist. This made my father, by the way, completely furious. He was a math freak. He loved math. And he didn't approve of that attitude at all. And it was stupid, actually. A stupid idea of what an artist is. But anyway, but in the end, so as I said, we spent part of a summer out on the dunes. And we had a small child and, I needed time off by myself. I said, I had this arrangement with my husband. I went 2 hours every afternoon. I didn't know but I had taken a drawing pad with me. I to this day, I don't really quite understand. I don't know exactly what I was thinking about, but I remember throwing it into my pack because we had to carry everything across the dunes to this shack. And honestly, I think it was an excuse. I think this is the first time I'm thinking this and saying it out loud. I think in a very profound way, it was an excuse to have 2 hours to myself and hand this young child over to my husband. So what was my excuse? Like, oh, I could have said, well, I'm just going for a walk, or I'm just going to the beach, I'm going to read. But that's not what I did. I went out and I made these drawings of these dune grasses. So I don't know what else I can tell. And of course, that was it. I was completely sucked in.
That's beautiful, Hermine. Thank you so much. Thank you again for this really lovely conversation. Back over to you, Magli.
Thank you so much, Chloe and Hermine. That was such a wonderful way to wrap this all up. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Hermine. And thank you, Jason, for your support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rail's YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation on the work of David Bird with Jason Andrew, Robert Cozzolino, Jessica Farrell, Jody Isaacson, and Lyle Rexer. And you can now turn on your microphone and say hello and goodbye as you leave.
Say hello to who?
Oh, say hello and goodbye as you leave.
Hello and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great job, Hermine. Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic
Tom. Thank you,
conversation.
Hermine.